Hey everyone, and welcome to the XDS podcast. I'm Anna Berdnyk, Deputy Head of Business Development at Roommate Group, your end-to-end strategic partner in external development. I'm super excited to share an engaging discussion on effective outreach, focusing on how to transition smoothly from initial communication to actual production and external game development. We've got an amazing panel lined up, hosted by Harish Rao from Sony PlayStation. Our panelists include industry leaders who bring a wealth of knowledge and unique perspectives to the table. Why am I so pumped about this podcast? In our industry, there are many factors that can affect cooperation between large game developers and vendors. Issues like time zone mix-ups or misunderstanding around AI policies can cause major problems. Hearing real experiences from industry professionals on how to make cooperation more productive is incredibly valuable. After all, when it comes to real projects, the cost of error can be very high. In this podcast, you'll find a lot of useful information about what clients are looking for when choosing a vendor. For example, how important are diverse portfolios, scalability, or strong security measures? Our panelists touch on how these needs have evolved and what still holds true for successful collaborations. You will also learn how to build reliable, long-term relationships and why transparency, seamless integration into client pipelines, and aligning on cultural values and management styles are key. While this might sound obvious, it's easier said than done. The experiences shared by our panelists will be valuable for anyone looking to improve their partnerships. As we keep evolving in external development, conversations like these are gold. They help us keep our ideas fresh and help us improve how we work with our stakeholders. And hey, this is just a taste of what you can expect from the XDS main stage, proudly sponsored by Roommate Group. We are all about bringing you dynamic, inspiring content that pushes game development forward. So let's get into it. Enjoy the podcast.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. I know Chris had asked me to kind of like come in and was happy to do so in all the scrambling that I'm sure all of us have been doing in the last couple of months or whatnot. But I thought it was important enough for us to talk about some of these actual important topics. So as you probably saw in the actual schedule, this is strategic outreach, navigating from communication to production in external development. And just a little bit of a brief overview before I turn it over to the introductions to our wonderful panelists here. Couple of things that I put down here, but I'll just summarize it by saying that one of the things that this panel is about communicating with external development teams. We know that there's several best practices that can enhance collaboration and productivity. By implementing the best practices, organizations can foster a collaborative working relationship, promote knowledge sharing, and ultimately achieve successful outcomes in their engagements with external development teams. So we're going to get into a lot of that in this particular panel discussion. Okay. So I wanted to start off first by introducing, I think we're going to go right from the end and come back this way, putting you on the spot a little bit.
Hi, I'm Stephanie, and I'm a Senior Outsource Manager at Epic Games.
Hi, my name is Elina Seppälä, or everybody usually calls me Ellie, and I'm the Executive Producer at Nitro Games.
Hi, I'm Walter de Torres. I am co-founder of Pixel Mafia.
And my name is Guillaume. I'm Key Account Manager at Virtuos.
I'll start with my very first question here, which is, and this is, I've oriented this for both sides of the equation, both clients and vendor facing. What are the key steps in selecting a vendor or client to ensure success?
You reordered these. I was expecting a different question first. For
Surprise.
us, it'll of course have a lot to do with what we're looking for in terms of what our disciplines need. So it's really going to be about their portfolio. I'm sorry that I feel like my answers are going to be quite obvious, but portfolio, ability to scale. Epic is quite large and we're getting bigger. And so, we need to make sure that our clients or our vendors are able to scale with us as the project scales. And one of the other big things, which I think was shown in the insights, is security. That's something that we really have to pay attention to. Because it's great if you have an excellent portfolio and you have the scale, you've got, competitive rates, but if you don't have the security required to work with us, then it's going to be a no-go immediately. Yeah.
I guess I can speak from the vendor side. For us, we're looking for fit primarily. With a company of our size, small to medium companies, it's really important that we have an opportunity for long-term engagement, because there is a very large investment on our side just to get a project up and running. So typically it'll take us anywhere from 3 to 6 months for a project to become profitable. So making sure that we choose the right partner is quite critical. And so I'm sure different vendors will have different criteria as well. I think it really also depends on the size of the company as well. Maybe some of those issues may be less important for a larger studio, but for a studio of our size, which is around 150, that is one of the things that we do consider.
Just to build on what you already said, I would maybe comment about the scalability. What I think nowadays is a big challenge, that how do you scale with quality? That when you really need to scale quickly, how do you make sure that the vendor or the partner can meet up the quality requirements for all the staff that they are providing for you, for example? And I think reviewing and understanding that in depth is becoming more and more important.
And yeah, I'll concur with what Walter said. We are a little bit larger, closing 4,000 people, so we would need filler project as well. So it doesn't have, not all projects have to be 5 years long and 50 people, and we would justify the investment even on smaller project into the hope of this will turn into something bigger later. If it's not right after, it can be a year later, 2 years later. For us, it would be more about flagging clients that are potentially at risk. So if I receive a request coming from a Gmail address, it's a red flag. There is no website, there is no phone number. It's, hey, can you give us a quote on that? It's like, no. What do you want? If you can't express what you want, I can't tell you what you need. So there will be that. And we had a period of time that was during my Glassec days where we were very, very careful when it was coming to crypto. NFT companies trying to make games, offering to pay in Ethereum. It's like, no, I need hard cold cash, sorry. And the last thing would be if we identify projects that would be too sensitive, like strong sexual content, porn games, or extremely religious games, we would be very, very careful approaching these kind of projects.
You reminded me of something also, Ellie, that depending on scale, we're also going to be looking at the way your team operates internally, and whether or not that's going to match the way that our team operates, and can we make those two work together. At our company, it's very common for us to integrate teams directly into our pipeline. And so we have to make sure that you are set up to be able to do that with us. And not only that, but depending on the size of the partnership, a lot of times we kind of know whether or not we're going to need to scale, but do you have the ability to sort of manage your team and develop training internally over time? We've already been talking a lot during this conference about how we can sort of help our vendors to be more autonomous. And that's something that we're looking at is, do you have the ability to be autonomous when the time comes? Maybe that's now, maybe that's in the future, but how are you set up to be able to support us in that way?
Just to comment quickly on that, I think you're touching a very important point. What we see is that there are big cultural differences, for example, in the leadership style when it comes to the partners. And we tend to make sure that our partners, for example, have a similar leadership style than what we have. We're very transparent, very open, very democratic in a sense that everybody can challenge everyone regardless of their title or background or years of experience, for example. And what we can see that this is, for example, a very big differentiator occasionally when we are selecting partners, or when we, for example, review them from the cultural perspective.
With regards to scale, I think a lot of that I think falls under fit. We've been approached on different projects where the scale kind of scared us a little bit, and we were just, I think it's really important for vendors to be very honest with their capabilities. Now, we typically start all projects really small, and so when companies do come to us and say, "Hey, we want you to get to 20 or 30 or so by this time frame," we're more than willing to do that as long as there is an understanding that we will have the support from the studio to be able to do that. To me, it's like, well, if you're going to grow that internally, what kind of support would you give your internal team in order to grow to that level? And the same thing has to happen from the external side. It can't just be a fire and forget type situation. So we're more than happy to grow and scale as long as we know that we're going to be like, we're going to have a partner in that journey to be able to hit those goals.
Excellent. So my follow-up question is really good because we have a good split here between the client side and the vendor side. So the other thing that actually has been happening, and it's been happening steadily as we've been going in external development over the course of the last several years, there's a lot of new players that come into play. So my follow-up question is, how do you go about choosing new clients and new vendors in terms of your processes?
I can talk about the challenges from like being a nobody, because 7 years ago, when we were pitching to a lot of you folks, we didn't have a track record. We couldn't talk about the projects that we're currently working on. All we could really do is try to sell people on us and being able to trust us. And what we found is that it never happened overnight. It was over, in some cases, 3 years of meeting at XDS and them showing that, hey, we're still around, we're still honest with what we can and can't do. And but yeah, it's not easy if you don't have anything that you can show. So it'd be interesting to hear, like, on the developer side, like, how do you trust somebody, because you are getting into a relationship with somebody that potentially may not have a track record yet.
I think in the past, the places I've worked, we've relied a lot on recommendations from people that have already worked with vendors. That is a really, really quick one, and I think that's pretty common. And then, to be honest with you, events like this have been very helpful, in particular, especially XDS. What doesn't work for me, and it's not because I don't care, but is the emails, the cold call emails and the LinkedIn messages, which I understand are sometimes the only way that you can reach out to someone. But most of the time we have zero bandwidth to follow up on those things. And so it's not because the interest isn't there. We just don't have the time. And so I'm 100% sure I've got several messages on my LinkedIn and on the GDC Connect app for meeting new vendors this week, which I would really like to do. I just know that I just didn't have the time. And so that's unfortunately an area that is not going to get as much success as I think people are hoping that it will. But when we are looking, obviously we're going to be looking online, we're in word of mouth. And what we really want to see is what you're really, really good at. Because a lot of the requests that we see will jump onto the website to look at the portfolio, and it is super hard to navigate. Or you only have a couple of examples, which I know is a challenge, in which case, let's get on a call and talk about what you may or may not be able to show. But if I can't find what I'm looking for, and it's easy to navigate, it's almost immediately like, okay, I don't have time for this. I have to jump to the next thing. And just one small anecdote, sometimes it is just like you happen across a vendor who you can see they're just really good at this one thing. And at my previous studio, that was the case, that we found a vendor. And to be honest, I don't remember how we found them. But we saw that there was one thing they were really good at, and they were very clear. They do only this kind of character work. They absolutely do not do anything else. So if that's what you want, we're not your studio. And it ended up turning great. And we ended up scaling them. They were used to other projects within the company. And so personally, I love to try to take a chance on the smaller studios. But a lot of times some of that also depends on the people above me who pay me to make these decisions and who are not necessarily on board to try new things. There's a lot of risk there that we can't always convince our leadership to invest in.
one of the challenges that I've faced is that when we build teams, we would actually try to, or what we call them is bold and smart teams. We take quite a lot of risk when building them due to the fact that we believe that through the risk, we also get outcomes that we won't be able to create otherwise. This, however, requires a lot of work from our small team to really navigate the background, the expertise, the mindset, and everything that comes with the new candidates. However, what we've seen is that if we pay a lot of attention on the selection process and on the onboarding, it will pay off. So far, I have to knock on wood, we haven't actually had any misses on that one. But I would probably say to the smaller companies or businesses, or whether it's a single artist or whoever who's doing their work alone, that try to differentiate yourself when you send those messages. Because as you very well put it, the never-ending stream of different types of LinkedIn messages, emails, and everything, you just don't have the time to even open those. And that's a really shame because, for example, a company like ours, where we really would like to find those different types of players or different type of developers or people in general who have the correct mindset, it is very difficult to kind of get those names out from that big mass that is just keeps on coming.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to transition a little bit here to the next question. It was touched upon a little bit earlier. Stephanie had mentioned it. Best practices about security and secure measures for actual vendors from a client perspective. How important is this for you when you're deciding on your external development partners? And what is the actual premium you put on security measures for vendor management?
I feel like I'm not super prepared to answer this question. I mean, the bottom line is that we absolutely cannot do work with a vendor unless they meet our security requirements, period. If there's ever a chance they're going to be within our in our Perforce and any of our streams and our engine, they absolutely have to pass an InfoSec check through our InfoSec team to establish whether or not we can work with them. So I mean, it almost comes first, because if the work can be amazing, but if you can't meet our security requirements and the way that we work, then it doesn't matter. There are a number of vendors that we're interested in working with that right now we just can't. Our security is not set up in a way that will allow us to do that yet, and it's something that we're working on. And it's nothing against those vendors at all, because they do have excellent work. But until the security concerns have been addressed, we have to find other solutions. What was the second half of your question again?
It's mostly in what premium you put on that for the actual vendor partners. Like, what do you think that they should? What do you feel like they should actually be investing in in terms of like security measures and protocols and things like that?
I'm definitely the wrong person to answer that question.
In terms of security, it's really a cost of entry. Like there's no negotiation about it. Even when we were starting off and we were a small team of 20, it didn't matter. So that was the one area that we couldn't scrimp on. Luckily, once you go through one due diligence process from, insert name of big studio here, the subsequent ones just become easier because you're mostly looking for the same thing. But that first one, wow, it was tough. It was tough.
It's getting tougher. We've seen the leaks. It is what it is, but it reflects on partners, obviously. And it's normal. And we had this chat with Ash when we prepped, and most large companies out there treat this extremely seriously. It's difficult for a newer player because it's a very big investment in terms of just money. It's expensive to be up to par in standards for very high level clearance of security. And as Walt said, once you've done one, you don't necessarily have done all of them, because each will have their specific request, which we need to be sensitive of and we need to be complying on. But then it becomes easier, yes. And then you get to another level when it comes to Hollywood IPs or with brands that are external to games or to the studios themselves. When the devs are themselves dealing with external IPs, that's another level of security clearance you need to pass, and it's time consuming, and that's also very important. It takes time. So sometimes this process can be, the clearance can take up to 6 months, sometimes more. And devs needs to be aware of that lead time in their schedule. You can't expect a vendor to be up and running next week if you ask for a 6-month security clearance in order to get your white label, approved, stamped. That will take some time. So we need to factor that in the production schedule, please.
And the last thing I'll say is I do think it can be relative to the size of the studio, because there was a studio that I had worked at that was significantly smaller than Epic Games, and their security practices were much, much different and much more minimal than Epic. And so I think it is proportional a lot of times to the studio size.
And unless you're dealing with Microsoft and Sam Carlisle. No, but having someone like Sam
Calling out you, Sam. Being called out, Sam.
helping you get onboarded. I remember that time. It was 7 years ago. It was tough. But having him guide me through that process, even though that I was very familiar with Microsoft process, I felt very different being on the other side. But it was I think with some studios you just can't get around it. It's nice to hear that your studio is able to, make exceptions, I guess, depending on the size of the studio.
I'll just add into this one because I feel like this is something that we deal with all the time at Sony, and I think my partners in the audience probably know this as well. It's actually very important when I actually talk to a vendor and they say, well, we've actually done it through this company or that company. I'm like, that's great. You have to get prepared now to do it through our company. And I think what's interesting is a lot of people don't realize that. They tend to think they're like, okay, well, I've already done it with this other studio, so that should be good enough for yours. And it's like, it's never that case. Like, we have our own protocols. And by the way, our security protocols have changed. Like, so in our company, we had one that was there like 6 months ago. Everybody knows about this. It's public knowledge out there. There was a data breach and everything changed. And so then it was like all of a sudden, recently talking to a vendor, they're like, oh, well, this is a lot different than what it was before. I'm like, yes, because things have changed. So it's a constant evolutionary kind of battle in terms of like how to get these approvals in place.
Yeah, and I also think that it depends on when you do the clearance, in a way that what we try to do is that we do the security clearance already when we are negotiating frame agreements. So basically we do the first step already then, even though it might be so that we are not even using them, but that's like the primary step that they need to anyway make, or they need to qualify in order to make it to the next step. And I think that also speeds up the process, but it's also transparent towards the partners that we are very open about, that this is how it's going to be. These are the requirements at this stage. These are the ones that you need to then go through if we go forward with kind of getting people from, for example, from your company.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to transition to another question that I have here. So this is a little bit of a sidestep. Getting into kind of like production itself, what are some of the essential elements that clients should include? And this is actually meant for both clients and vendors. What are some of the essential elements that clients should include in their request for proposals to ensure a successful vendor selection process?
All right, let's go. Visibility on production. Very often, we are given very clear and very complete information about the test or the pilot without necessarily knowing what's happening next. And when I pick a team, I need to know what they're going to do next, because we talked about flexibility and scalability. Can I deliver this test? Yes. Can I grow 50 people? Maybe not. So why would I do a test if I cannot scale behind? And that's going to be a waste of time for everyone. Budget. What's your budget? You know our price. How much are you ready to pay for that? Can we get a line right off the bat? If not, how do we go around it? Can we talk? Is there a common ground, or is it just, let's part ways now? We will never find a common ground. Schedule, obviously, and then benchmark, technical specifications, point of contact. Who are we dealing with? That's very important. Who will be our main point of contact? Is it you that sends the RFP, or is it going to be other folks in your team? And you will as well want to know who will be your point of contact. Here are our leads. Here are the people that you'll be dealing with every day. So be as open and transparent as possible. It's not a hiding game. It's not a guessing game. The more we put on the table, the more accurate we will be able to answer your needs. What are your needs? Do you know what you want? Do you know how we can help you? And I think from there, if we can get all of this information packaged together, it's a win.
I think in terms of understanding what happens after that RFP is really important. There's some pilot tests that we don't take primarily because we know that, well, that doesn't really match our ability to kind of hit some of those goals. But equally important to us is making sure that we have support on that side. Depending on how the level of project is integrated, like if we're working directly in Engine, I would also expect to see a lot of support on that other side. Who's going to be our advocate? Who's going to be providing that feedback? Who's going to be providing that training? If it's going to be a long-term project where it's more than a year, 2 years, when are you sending somebody over to our studio to do on-site training? Or when can we send people over there to do training? I think it's unreasonable to expect a vendor to say, hey, yeah, we want you to grow to 30 people, but not provide the same level of support that you would for an internal art team. So a lot of that is really just the best practices is really like, what are you doing internally? Try to mirror that for the external company. But it obviously depends on the level of the kind of work that you're doing with them, right? So not all engagements require the same level of support and integration.
Good comments. Not that much to add, but maybe a few specific ones. First, obviously, the elephant in the room. So the usage of AI and how does the client approach that issue in generally, whether they have policies on that or whether they have some sort of a restrictions, for example. To be very transparent on this, I think it's extremely important. So that's why I think that it should be addressed as soon as possible. And when it comes to the production pipeline, I think that here you can see various ways of handling it. So I would again encourage to be very transparent, open, tell where there is room for negotiation. For example, in case of delays, if there are no room for negotiation, then that should be very specifically stated already in the beginning. And then as a very specific final comment, what I've found useful is that it's very important also to understand the KPIs, how the client is measured. It's not necessarily put into any agreement or state of work or whatever, but it gives you as a partner, it gives you a totally different approach on the project when you know that how your client is measured and what are the KPIs for them.
I think when we're preparing RFPs, for us, what we want to make sure that we're including is clear examples of the work, very, very clear deliverables. And that includes not just what we're asking you to do, but the timeline that we want to do it in. This is the estimated timeline. These things should take for you to accomplish this. And what we're really looking to see too is a clear outline of what that scalability might look like if it's required, the team sizes that you have, if you what your strategy is around working with teams that are in multiple countries. How do you handle that? We want to understand the way that you work so that our production teams are as informed as possible about the way that you work and the way that you operate, in addition to providing a test, a paid test in my preference. There are probably some folks in legal that might not want that, but I prefer a paid test. And making sure that what you are signing up for is clear to you. I don't know that the client and service provider can always agree on all of the information that will be shared in the RFPs for multiple reasons, but I think we're aligned on a lot of the big ones.
Excellent. So Ellie, you'd mentioned the big topic. Obviously, it was in the presentation this morning. Let's talk a little bit about AI, shall we? So obviously, there's legislation that hasn't been passed yet. We're still waiting for a lot of this. There's various kind of elements when it comes to AI. You have stability diffusion. You have certain models that are out there. I'm just curious on both the client and the vendor side of things. What is your positioning when do you add this already as language into your contracts when you're actually doing this with your particular vendor partners? And if on the vendor side, are you utilizing AI? How much are you actually disclosing? Is it integrated through all of your teams, or is it done as a special research and development division of your company? Just curious, because it's becoming a bigger and bigger kind of modality that's coming up as we go further along with this technology coming into play.
I think I have one person here, two people here on my team that can tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think that we have anything written in yet. It's possible that we do, but I do know that our guidelines for our company in particular are that it is AI is not allowed in any of our partnerships as it relates to art. Epic is known for Fortnite. It is a very, very specific art style that has been established over many years, and so we don't take any chances as far as AI is concerned for any content production.
Yeah, I need to echo with that art and stuff that has a very strong copyright connection, that is obviously out of the table. But I presume, and I was a little bit surprised to see the outcome in the survey, what was shown in the beginning of this event, that so little of the respondents said that they are utilizing AI. Because if you think about the back end side, I'm not a tech person or programmer, but I do know, and based on the experience when discussing with different partners and companies in general, that, for example, utilizing AI on the back end side, that is quite normal, I would say. So that's why, for example, that response was quite surprising, at least for myself. We don't have specific clauses in the agreements, but we are very wary. For example, if we have partners in connection to art, for example, that there we are very specific of the requirements that we have. We are also very specific on the audit trail and the kind of screening of the final products, what they're doing, that we know how they've been done, and we can always then explain and open up that process fully if somebody requires that.
For us, we primarily follow the lead of our clients. Two of our clients actually have put it in agreements, they've updated their master services agreement, so it's right in there saying that we should not utilize it. If our clients want to experiment, we'll do that. I think the most important part is really transparency. We never want to do anything that surprises our client. So if it is something that we're gonna we may want to alter the workflow or whatever, then that's something that we're going to be working directly with our client to come up with.
I think Guillaume?
Out of 62% do not answer. No, we are using AI. We are looking into AI. We have an R&D team focusing on AI. AI is coming. It's in my opinion, not necessary to fight it. You need to embrace it. You need to understand it. Nothing that gets in front of the player is leveraging AI, so that there is no problem of IP ownership. Nothing getting into the game is using AI. So it's going to be for pipeline, for back-end work, to streamline processes, internal research. And then after that, it's, as Walt said, depending on every client. Some clients are very against it, and it's a matter of understanding why. And do they themselves understand why they are against it, or is it just the legal teams that just said no AI, put it on the contract? Why? Does the legal team understand what it means? So trying to understand that will 100% of the time, once you understand, you can find a solution.
I'm going to transition to another question real quick here. So I'm a very big proponent about cultural context when it comes to actually working with external partners, depending on which region of the world we're talking about. And so my last question for now is all about communication with external development partners. And what I have down here is, how do you account for English language barriers for information and content delivery? Meaning, when you're doing documentation, how much documentation you put together, what do you account for? How do you account for the potential barriers or mistranslations that might happen when you're giving over documentation or directives to vendors?
Maybe this is a stupid comment, and my apologies for that. But kind of, we don't really have any partners or people working in the teams who don't like you, who don't have sufficient level of English. It's just a no-go. We have all the teams are so international. So, and like I said, that we try to build smart and bold teams. So it's extremely important that all the team members understand constantly where we're heading, what we're doing, what's the ambition level, and they need to be active participants. You can't piggyback and just sit there and do your own thing. Even if you would be a junior programmer, we expect you to be active and take lead. So in that sense, it's like no-brainer. If you can't communicate, it's very difficult to be a part in the team then.
So real quick question, Ellie, for that, because that's a very important point that you're bringing up. But oftentimes, depending on the regions that you're dealing with, sometimes they're not very forthwith with actually communicating. Like they're very passive, or they don't speak up necessarily.
I come from Finland. That's like the basic rule. So what do you mean?
No, I'm not talking about on your side. I'm talking about from the vendor side. So oftentimes, depending on, this often happens in Asia, where there's a lot of silence. You'll be on a call. I've had this many times where there's a lot of silence, and sometimes that can be construed for, okay, I guess if you're not going to say anything, you're going to you're agreeing with everything I'm saying, which isn't necessarily the case. And I'm just curious to know, have you dealt with that? Has that come up? And how do you actually deal with those kind of scenarios?
Yes and no. Basically, what I would probably start with the fact that when we select our partners, we are quite open about the working culture, as I mentioned already, that we expect people to be active. We expect them to take ownership. And for example, if we would have, this is only an example, a tech lead coming from India, for example, we would go through that cultural differences, kind of the cultural introduction with this candidate, and we would explain the working environment, we would explain the very, very low hierarchy that we have, and also this kind of full transparency, what we try to employ in all the things that we do. And what we've seen is that, and this is what I personally appreciate a lot, is that then we have also occasions when the candidate or the partner can say that, okay, maybe this is not a good fit. And I appreciate that highly, because obviously we all want those projects to be successful. And when we lay down the kind of rules of the game or the way that we work, it's very great that they say that maybe this is not a good fit.
I would say that it's quite similar for us. Usually the bigger deal is making sure that there is, one or two points of contact on the vendor team that do speak English quite well and who are able to clearly share feedback or information that we have. And I ask the discipline teams as we're working with the different disciplines that we staff up for, that is a question that we ask them, which is how integrated are they going to be? Are you going to be speaking directly with the artists? Or are you going to be speaking only with the producer or project manager? Because that will change the answer to the question. And, we are honest about that with our vendors. And we recently had a really successful, it's still ongoing partnership with a vendor where a lot of their resources are not located in North America. And they were able to provide North American contact points, in art direction and production who, I have had experiences with that where it was not successful. And I've had very positive ones like the one we have now. And that vendor worked really hard to make sure that they were set up internally to be able to have the right communication happening across their different studios. The only other thing I'll say too is that, we're fortunate enough to have, we have Epic Games Brazil, we have Epic Games China. And so as we continue to staff up in some of those other locations, we're starting to leverage some of those other studios more often to be able to have direct communication with the studios that are located near them where they aren't going to have that language barrier, and sort of building up those studios to be more autonomous.
Excellent. So in our studio, all of our artists speak English, but I think what Harish is talking about is that some of the cultural differences that can lead to some of those challenges. So even though we're going English to English, there's still some translation that's needed to be able to let our artists know what the client is actually saying. Like our client could say, okay, it's okay. Like, clearly that's not okay. But our artist will say, oh, you said it's okay, so I'm just gonna, we're good. So in order to break those barriers down, I think a lot of it just comes down to time and patience and being able to create that relationship. It just, I think in some cultures, it just takes a little bit longer to build that level of trust. A lot of our artists are it's still a second language for them, so they're not as confident to be able to communicate. So it just takes a bit of time. When we work with Chinese or Japanese clients, I think that's where it becomes really challenging because English isn't necessarily the primary way to communicate with them, and so we typically have to try to get bilingual producers to kind of help translate. But there's also additional cultural barriers there to kind of address.
Just commenting quickly that what we also try to do very strongly is to support the product leads or the project leads in their leadership skills, that they would be able to encourage those individuals who are not necessarily so brave, for example, using English to express their views. And we've got actually very good results out of this, that we are that we push our product leads to be more active on the leadership side, not only looking at that the project itself goes forward in accordance with the timetable and budget and everything, but more that they are able to get out of the individual, get the best out of each individual in the team. And that requires a lot of leadership support for those product leads, because usually they are quite limited from the experience perspective. They might have a long experience in leading a project per se, but they do not have that leadership skill set yet. And therefore we found like very beneficial to support them in this, so that they can then also make sure that each and every individual in the team is, for example, brave enough to express their views and experiences as they go along.
I think as time passes by, it's becoming less and less of an issue, because there is this internationalization, especially in Southeast Asia, where English is becoming more and more common. However, just the most simplest way to avoid that is be visual in your feedbacks and pictures, photos, videos, or live reviews, and then don't send a fucking essay to explain feedback. It's not needed. It's not helping. And then there is cultural difference that is also extremely important. And then that's the partner, the service provider responsibility to have people in the team to understand this culture. If you want to work with a certain culture client, then you need to understand it. Walt mentioned Japan. I know if we want to work with Japan, we are going to have a native Japanese working on the project, because there is no other way around it. Point blank. Same goes with Korea. And because of that, very often when we work with Western clients, 15 years ago, I was receiving pitched on, we're going to work on that. And I was so excited. And then you turn to the team and say, hey, we're going to do, the reference was the Lord of the Ring. And all the team looked at me and was like, eh? I was like, nobody knew what it was. And I was like, okay. So here goes some explanation about what you grew up with is not what the teams grew up with. And you need to be sensitive of that and understanding of that. And so you need to be clear about expectations.
I'll add one last thing, which is that I think sometimes internal leads, and this is a little similar to what you were saying, I think sometimes internal leads need coaching. And they need education on how to deliver that feedback, because they may not understand that the way they're delivering it is not clear to their vendor. I had an animation director that would give very, very if you've ever been in animation, you would completely understand what he said. But if you were not an animator, you would be like, I have no idea what this is. I don't know what you're trying to tell me. And then there was a language barrier on top of that. And so we had to do a lot of training with him to help him clarify his feedback and keep it simple, no essays, keep it simple and concise, and provide visual reference and visual feedback to get his point across, because he wasn't getting what he was asking for and he was getting frustrated. And it's because he wasn't bending to be able to provide the type of feedback the vendor would be receptive to.
Yeah, excellent. I'll just add one last point to that one. And it's interesting because like last several months, one comment that came out is like, just was talking to somebody in passing that was actually part of another partner studio. They're like, we got these like technical documents. There's like a lot of English in it. That's that's the point that it's too much. You've done too much. You have to pull it back. And I agree, put more visuals into it, and because it can get misinterpreted. And the thing is that once something gets misinterpreted, you'll never know. You'll just see it on the feedback that comes through, and then it's going to create schedule drift, all these other things that actually happen that we all deal with.